And now we are going to be joined by Scot Faulkner, who is the Executive Director for the Dreyfuss Initiative. And I want to give you a little bit of his background. If I gave you all of his background, I would need like 3 more shows. Scot is the author of the critically acclaimed bestseller, Naked Emperors, The Failure of the Republican Revolution. He's had articles published in the New York Times, the Washington Times, various other business publications. He has appeared on every radio show known to mankind, every network, corporate advisor on strategic change and leadership. He works with governments and corporations in emerging economies, bachelor's degree in government, master's degree in public administration. He studied at the London School of Economics and Georgetown University, national personnel director for the 1980 Reagan-Bush campaign, and then became part of the presidential transition team and served as a member of President Reagan's White House staff. Went on, within the context of that administration, to serve in executive positions for the FAA, the GSA, and the Peace Corps. And more recently, he served as the first chief administrative officer of the United States House of Representatives. Now, to put that in perspective, that's the non-legislative operations of the House. It's about $1 billion budget and 14,000 employees. And his business-based reform saved over $148 million under his guidelines. And his model of business-based reforms are now being used by 44 national parliaments around the world. His approach was named one of the top 100 innovations in American government by the Ford Foundation and Harvard University. Americans for Tax Reform named Scot an outstanding member of Congress. He has 26 management awards and 4 presidential letters of commendation. And Scot, when I welcome you to the show, I've just got to ask you one simple question.
Sure.
What did Richard see in your background that gave him any thought that you could help him?
I think the main issue is, of course, Richard and I had known each other through some of our historic preservation efforts. But I think the key is that we both recognize that revitalizing America's civic culture is really foundational. As Richard likes to say, it is pre-partisan. And so to have Richard, who is a centrist, and myself, who is a conservative, who's moved center as well, and having the two of us in 100% agreement on what needs to be done shows that this is not some Trojan horse for either side of the political spectrum.
I think that's a very important point because just as I try and do through my trilogy, if we don't start getting the sides talking and we don't start moving in a common direction, we're going to see this senseless partisanship continue that does nothing more than aggravate all of us.
Exactly.
Now, the Dreyfuss Initiative is really the first national civics movement of its kind. Can you kind of bring our audience up to speed what distinguishes TDI?
The main issue is that TDI is a fully integrated, multifaceted approach to our civic culture. As you look at, there's literally hundreds of groups that are working on civics, and yet our civic culture continues to unravel. And the main reason is that most of them focus on one class or one simulation or one book or even one demographic, and think that magical silver bullet is going to reverse literally decades of deterioration. What we've come up with, really Richard as our leader has come up with, is a fully integrated approach. If we're looking at an unraveling civic culture, the reweaving of that civic culture is going to have to draw on many different threads and bring them back together. The K through 12 curriculum pipeline to get our young people prepared to be true, engaged citizens. The arts, engaging not only the writers and the playwrights and the plays companies themselves, but also looking at other media to bring civics and citizenship back to center stage. And then finally, looking at our entire intellectual moorings, the foundation of our foundation. The Founding Fathers did not wake up one moment in 1776 or 1787 and magically come up with representative democracy and 3 branches of government and an independent judiciary. They read and interacted with the thought leaders of the time. They read the books of John Locke and others in the century before, and that is the Enlightenment. And so bringing the Enlightenment back to center stage, giving people an opportunity to understand the foundation of the foundation is really what this is all about.
Scott, let's talk about each of those 3 legs to the stool, if you will. Let's start with the American History Play Competition that Richard spoke to briefly towards the end of our first segment. Tell me a little bit more about that, and Richard, feel free to jump in any time.
Well, Richard, of course, this was especially his main area because he's pretty much appeared on almost every stage among the League of Regional Theaters, what we call the LORT theaters, and these would be like the La Jolla Theater in California, the Guthrie in Minneapolis, the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. And the key is figure out how do we prime the pump, how do we inspire the arts to focus on American history, both the actual facts, events that shaped our history, but also looking at alternate history. What if something didn't happen, or what if something did happen, and how does that help us inform ourselves on what kind of country we are and what kind of country we need to avoid becoming?
Ultimately, I think there's something that should be said, which is that this ends in an emotional place, in love of country. And one of the things that will make me lose my sense of humor very quickly is to be told that because you're not right-wing, you have no right to love your country, or you have no right to love your flag, or you have no right to support the troops if you don't support the policy. These are the things that make me lose my sense of humor. I am fascinated and in love with my country. I think it has given gifts to mankind unknown and unlike any other country ever did or ever will. I think we have much to be proud of here. And to be told that you can only express that love if you're on the right is, to me, a waste of love and devotion. And there are so many great stories in America that you would want to see them as plays. You'd want to learn from them. How many oaths did Robert E. Lee break in order to love his country and what was his country? How many great stories are there? When Texas was thinking about secession a few years ago, I said, I can bring Texas back into the Union without even talking to Texas. And they said, why? How? I said, just tell them the story of Sam Houston, who was the most eccentric, enormous personality that ever lived in this country. There are extraordinary things to devote yourself to, and all we have to do is know them.
You know, you have brought up in some other writings something that I thought was interesting, that other countries' writers and performers humanize historic figures and formative events, and recent American movies and plays tend to demonize ours, and I think that was a great point. Now, we've talked a little bit, Scott, about the George Washington Institute. Share with us a little more about the Curriculum Enhancement Project.
Again, taking Richard's core curriculum and taking it across the entire spectrum. We call it civics across the curriculum, and that means that a person teaching mathematics, a person teaching biology, a person teaching music or the arts can bring examples and themes of citizenship into those classes beyond just the typical English classes and social studies classes. And so we've formed a national curriculum team made up of some of the leading scholars and practitioners in curriculum development and early childhood development. And we have been building what we call curriculum maps, which are suggested learning activities, key questions, and support materials to take into the classroom. We've begun working with a number of leading universities and have actually begun piloting teacher certification seminars which we've been doing over the summer, because this is the time teachers get to take time. These are K through 12 teachers get to take time to earn credits and recertify in different areas. So we've got one certification seminar that's specific to civics across the curriculum. We have another one focusing explicitly on the life and learnings of George Washington,
who, by the way, personified better than anyone else the values that we hold dear and hold as cherished. He established the template of what a great president was. He was not a particularly eloquent man, but what he said had weight and dignity and depth. And if we all followed his example, we would never be hypnotized away by demagogues. He was the last to be a demagogue. He was a realist and the first American, the first man loyal to the whole nation.
And when you look at George Washington, and you have many people from the Enlightenment onward who've written wonderful words, but it's the deeds of George Washington that really resonate through time. He's the only person who has walked away from power twice. He was the head of the victorious army. He could have become a dictator, another Napoleon. He didn't. He was a wildly popular president who had been unopposed. He chose to step down after 2 terms. When he was president and presiding over the Constitutional Convention, he acted as an honest broker instead of injecting himself. And the other part is Washington was a person who learned. I mean, he was a bit impetuous during the French and Indian War. Some people say he actually started the French and Indian War.
Yeah, he was a bit impetuous. Yeah.
And so the key is that he learned and seasoned with time and became then a mentor in his later life. And that's exactly the story of America. We may have been impetuous in our founding, but we learn and we grow and we become a mentor for others.
Hey, I've always said if they were going to make a movie about him, they could do a play on words of one that's already been made and just call him the man who wouldn't be king.
Exactly.
And Scott, real quickly, before we go to break, where can people go to get more information, and how can they help with the Dreyfuss Initiative?
The Dreyfuss Initiative is www.thedreyfussinitiative.org. Our current website is under renovation. I mean, you can go onto it, but we're going to have a much more elaborate website and more interactive by Labor Day. But on the website, there is material dealing with our curriculum. We also have a YouTube channel where Richard's remarks from many different forums are featured, and people can write us. And again, or email us off the website. We're very interested in ideas. We're very interested in partners. And, of course, we're very interested in getting additional resources, because a lot of our effort is volunteer. But as we move to these more detailed programs, we're always looking for financial resources to underwrite these programs and ultimately to endow some of the scholastic efforts.
I would say also 2 things. If you believe in this country, or you believe that it can be the country that you thought it could be when you were in the 5th grade, then help us get there and send us money. We need money because we're not a branch of the government. We're just citizens trying to get this accomplished. And the second thing is this. If you disagree, if you think for some reason that it's not important to teach the young the basic fundamentals of civics, of how to run the country, call in this show or write us at thedreyfussinitiative.org. I dare you, because I've spoken to 170,000 people and no one has ever disagreed with the necessity of teaching the young.
Well, it has been a great show. I really appreciate your time. And I'm going to ask everybody to, open your minds, open your hearts, and open your wallets. Go to the DreyfusInitiative.org. See if you can participate either as a volunteer or monetarily. I know it's a wonderful organization doing wonderful things. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for listening. This is the Common Sense Czar, and I approve of this message. Good night, America.
The Rick Amato Show on KCBQ.